George Wallace still the most powerful politician in Alabama?
I would certainly have to agree with that assessment. I think his track record of 4 terms as governor, serving his 4th term, having elected his wife to a term as governor, which is unprecedented, certainly in Alabama, I would say he was still the dominant figure on the Alabama political scene. Yes, sir.
Has Governor Wallace put together a machine? We talk about political machines around the country, a very well-organized structure, political machine there in Alabama, which he uses to run the state?
Not similar to some of the machines that perhaps some of the former U.S. senators in Alabama had, John Sparkman, Lister Hill, but the governor of Alabama has such enormous appointive power and Governor Wallace has been in office for such a long time, and there's so very many public officials serving in the counties and around the state who owe their jobs to Governor Wallace, and they are the nucleus, the basis really of his support around the state. I suppose he's appointed more than half of the judges in Alabama during the past 20 years, and so many county officials who have built their own careers politically on that appointment. That would be the basis for his strong grassroots support, his organization, if you want to call it that.
Then historically, if you appoint someone to a political position, whether it be a judge or county sheriff or whatever the position, if you appoint someone, that person is then loyal to the governor and basically does follow the governor and listens to that person's advice?
He would be a terrible ingrate if he weren't, I would think. I believe if the governor appointed me to a major job, a big paying job, I think I would feel indebted to support him for the remainder of my career, yes. And certainly there have been some people who have fallen away from him, have dropped off, but most of those people, appropriately so, I think, have remained loyal to Governor Wallace.
Good morning and welcome to C-SPAN. For the next hour, we're going to be taking a look at politics in the state of Alabama as C-SPAN continues its States of the Nation tour. This morning, joining us live from Montgomery, Alabama to talk about politics in that state is Bob Ingram, and he is the editorial director with WSFA Television in Montgomery. He's been with them since 1979. In the past, he's been owner and publisher of Alabama Magazine from 71 to 84, state finance director under Governor Albert Brewer from 68 to 71, newspaper reporter from 49 to 1966. Final 13 years, he was a political columnist with the Montgomery Advertiser. He also a syndicated columnist in 30 Alabama newspapers. He has a BA degree in history, graduating from Auburn University, and is originally from Center, Alabama. Let's talk a little bit more about Alabama politics. Why don't we work our way through the congressional delegation and take a look at an overview of some of the leaders. Let's start with Senator Heflin. Now, he is a very well-known figure here in Washington. Is Senator Heflin a powerful man politically there in Alabama?
I would say perhaps second only to George Wallace. Senator Heflin, of course, was Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court for a number of years. In 1978, he ran and was overwhelmingly elected to the U.S. Senate. I would suspect that Senator Heflin will remain in Senate as long as he or the Lord allows. I don't believe he fortunately comes from the north end of the state where the preponderance of votes are, the Tennessee Valley, Birmingham and North. I don't see Senator Heflin coming back home until he wants to come back home. He is a very powerful figure in Alabama politics.
Now, former Supreme Court Justice Black was from Alabama. He was a judge in the state and went on to be senator and then Supreme Court Justice. Governor Wallace started out, I believe, as a judge in Alabama. And Senator Howell Heflin prides himself on his experience, I believe, as a judge there in Alabama. Is that one of the normal roots of power in Alabama, moving up from the courts into the major political positions?
Not really. There have been those instances you mentioned and others, but the judicial posts have not oftentimes been springboards. Usually when a man, or in a rare case a woman, is elected judge, they generally spend their life on the bench. That's where they want to be, and it is interesting that you point that out, that of course Senator Black, who later became Associate Justice Hugo Black of the U.S. Supreme Court, followed that route. George Wallace, of course, was a circuit judge for a few years, but that's not the normal pattern, no, sir.
Senator Howell Heflin here in Washington serves on the Senate Agriculture Committee, Senate Judiciary Committee, and the Select Committee on Ethics. Let's talk a little bit about that. Is the senator in the right committees, doing the right kind of work to help the state of Alabama?
I would think so. Certainly agriculture is still the backbone to a large degree of the Alabama economy, and I know for a fact that Senator Heflin very much wanted to be on that committee, understandably, and I think that is an appropriate place for him to be. Certainly judiciary, a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, a man who reformed the state's court system and made it a model for the nation, and for which he has won much national recognition. That, too, is an appropriate place for Senator Heflin. Yes, I think that's where he should be.
Let's talk about Senator Jeremiah Denton, the junior senator from your state. He's in his first term, and he is up for re-election, a well-known war hero. He was a POW, became almost a national star when he returned from Vietnam. Tell us something about Senator Jeremiah Denton, his work and popularity in the state.
If you had asked me a couple of years ago the likelihood of Senator Denton being returned to the Senate after one term, I think I would have said slim and none, as most observers would have. Senator Denton got off to a rocky start in the Senate. He was totally new to the political arena. He didn't run his store properly, if I may put it that way. His office was at sometimes rather chaotic in responding to the needs and the demands of the constituents. But he has made a remarkable turnaround, and I would say right now, and I think the polls, I know the polls confirm this, that Senator Denton is going to be exceedingly difficult to be defeated next year when he seeks a second term. I think he will indeed return for another 6-year term in the Senate. You mentioned the hero, and I would digress a minute, and I'm not going to give you a history lecture, but Alabama voters historically have liked heroes. They like people who they perceive as fighters, men of courage, and Heflin himself is a decorated combat veteran of the Marine Corps in World War II. George Wallace, much the same way. History is full of this in Alabama, and Denton is the latest example. The POW, the God Bless America when he stepped off the plane. He's got a strong attraction in Alabama, and I think he will be around a long time too.
When he came to Washington, elected in 1980 as a senator, he made it very clear that his emphasis as a senator was going to be on moral issues.
Yes.
He put a very strong campaign here in Washington, talked a great deal about it. Those kind of issues, the moral issues, also took a leading role in the fight against terrorism and talking about that. The moral issues and terrorism, is that a winning combination in Alabama?
You can't beat it. You cannot beat it in Alabama. It is very definitely a winning combination. Alabama remains a rather conservative state, strongly conservative state. A vast majority of the Alabamians are. Moral issues are very important. The church is very important in the life of most Alabamians, and Senator Denton, I'm not suggesting he knew this and used it. I think he is sincere in his views on that. Interestingly, some of your viewers may not know this, he is one of the first non-Protestants ever to be elected to a statewide office in Alabama. Of course, he's a very active Catholic, but even that did not work against him. In the past, that was considered a kiss of death, but again, he was on the right side of the issues. He was the hero coming home from the war.
Now, he's the first Republican senator for Alabama, is that correct?
Well, since the Reconstruction, yes.
Now, in 1986, one of the big topics of discussion nationally is whether or not the Republicans can hold on to their slim majority in the Senate and keep all those committee chairmanships. The Democrats definitely want to regain control of the majority. So obviously, Senator Howell or Senator Denton's campaign down there is important. You think he's definitely a shoo-in then?
I think shoo-in perhaps is stronger than I would say, but at this point in time, I would have to say he is a strong favorite to defeat either of the likely Democratic nominees. Congressman Shelby from Tuscaloosa is a very likely, a certain candidate for the Democratic nomination. Secretary of State Don Siegelman is likely to oppose him in the Democratic primary, but there is simply nothing in the polls, there's nothing that any of us who circulate around and look and snoop see that would suggest that either of them could defeat Senator Denton at the present time, unless he makes a terrible mistake of some sort, and I can't imagine what that might be. I believe Senator Denton will probably be returned to Washington. Yes, sir.
Joining us live from Montgomery, Alabama is Bob Ingram, and he's the editorial director there of WSFA Television in Montgomery, Alabama. Has been involved in covering politics there in Alabama for quite some time, and we're going to take a close look examining the current political situation in Alabama this morning. A little different from what we normally do this particular program, in that we usually take a look at the newspapers and find out what's going on around the country, but we thought we would take an hour this morning and concentrate specifically on one of the states in the South and find out what's happening there. Phone lines are open for viewers in all areas of the country. If you have a question or a comment you'd like to ask Mr. Ingram about the issues going on there in Alabama or something there related, we'd certainly like to hear from you. Those of you who live in the state of Alabama, the number that you can call is 202-628-2525. And those of you watching around the country, it's 202-783-2727. Let's take a second and talk a little bit about the economy of Alabama. A lot of stories about how the recession in the early 80s hurt Alabama a good deal. Has Alabama recovered from the economic recession?
We've not totally recovered. Certainly, like most other states, we hear things have turned around to a substantial degree. I think I would make this point. It may not be known without Alabama, but Alabama's economy basically is sort of like a three-legged stool. It's agriculture, it's textiles, and to the surprise of many, it's industry related to the automotive field. And of course, agriculture, you know the plight of the farmers. Textiles is an absolute disaster in Alabama. And the automotive industry went through the very difficult times. And in Alabama, we have Goodyear, we have Goodrich, we have Michelin making the tires, and they didn't make any tires. We have the steel in Birmingham, they didn't buy the steel. GM and Ford in North Alabama. All over the state, we have these industries related to automotive. So you may remember that during the really severe days of the Depression, Alabama was battling with Michigan and West Virginia to be #1 in the nation in unemployment, the highest unemployment. We suffered terribly. We're still suffering, but there is, as the national economy has turned, so has Alabama's. We still have problems. Textiles is a terrible, terrible crisis. Agriculture still has its problems, but things are finally, hopefully, looking up in the state.
Joining us now from Lanier High School in Montgomery, Alabama, is a group of 12th grade government students who have some questions about politics. Their teacher there is Miss Amy Matt, and they have some questions for Bob Ingram. If you're with us, Lanier High School, go ahead, please.
Okay. Mr. Ingram.
Yes, sir.
Why do you think that Alabama State spends so much time and money on fighting tests that point out problems in its teacher training program rather than correcting the problems?
The question is, why does Alabama State University spend so much time fighting tests rather than working to improve the quality of the teaching there? Is that your question, sir? Basically? You're referring to the litigation in court now, which has declared invalid the teacher competency testing test given to teachers. Is that your question, young man?
I think it is. Go ahead.
I think that certainly the argument that the black leadership has made is that these tests are culturally biased, racially biased, and therefore they are unfair, and a federal judge has agreed with this and has not only thrown it out, but fined the state a substantial sum of money for having imposed these tests on these teachers. I don't question the sincerity of the leadership at Alabama State and the black leadership. I do know that many on the other side, if I may say that, wonder why they don't spend a little more time perhaps upgrading the teaching at these universities, which are having difficulty where the applicants are. But beyond that, that would be the only way I can answer that question.
Lanier High School, did you have a second question?
Yes. In this past Sunday's Birmingham News, a poll was taken which showed that a majority of people would vote for Governor Wallace if he ran again. The majority also said that the governor's health affected his job performance. Can we infer from this poll that the people have a lot of confidence in the governor's aid?
As I recall, the poll showed that if the vote were taken, Governor Wallace, I believe, would lead with 26 or 27% of the vote. Not that a majority of people would support him for governor. And you can look at polls a lot of ways. I can look at it and say, well, George Wallace is leading the poll with 26%. But knowing Alabama politics as I think I do, that tells me that there's 74% out there who want someone other than George Wallace as governor. So I don't know that the poll is a cause for celebration among the Wallace people. Certainly, those who feel that he should continue to serve despite his well-known, well-publicized health problems, they must have some respect, appreciation for the aides who oftentimes have to take over for the governor when he is not able to serve. So I suppose it is an endorsement of sorts of the type of government we've had for the past 3 years, yes.
Is it true, Bob Ingram, that the staff of Governor Wallace is known as Wallace Incorporated in the sense that they do run the state of Alabama?
Well, I've heard that expression and a few others, but mostly who's in charge today is the question, because the governor, and I'm not knocking Governor Wallace, a personal friend for 35 years, but he has had serious health problems, as the world knows, and there have been many times when it has been necessary for his aides to fill in for him. And just who is in charge on a particular day has been an appropriate question, and it's been very appropriate in recent weeks during all the controversy about some of his staff members while he was in China and Korea and Japan.
Lanier High School, a third question.
Yes, Mr. Ingram, how do you feel that citizens of Alabama will react if the issue of the lottery is put to a referendum?
The question about a lottery, and of course that has national interest because they become so popular everywhere. I have a strong suspicion that if the question of a lottery was submitted to a statewide vote of the people, that it would be approved. Even as conservative and as church-going as many Alabamians are, I think it would be, because I'm sure it will be offered as an alternative to an increase in taxes. And anytime you offer anything to rather than a tax increase, I believe they will go for it. I suspect it will. If it is submitted to the vote of the people, it would probably pass.
Bob Ingram, editorial director with WSFA-TV in Montgomery, Alabama, is our guest this hour. We're talking about politics in that state, taking a very close look at Governor George Wallace, a well-known national political figure. If you have a question or a comment, we'd certainly like to hear from you. Those numbers are there at the bottom of your screen. If you live in Alabama, it's 202-628-2525, and those of you in the rest of the country, it's 202-783-2727. Let's take a call from Cheyenne, Wyoming. Good morning. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I don't really have any question for your guest this morning, but just a general comment on your States of the Nation format. We're just getting up and getting moving here in Cheyenne, Wyoming right now, and C-SPAN is part of my regular getting up and moving around in the morning. But the States of the Nation does not really, I think, interest the other 49 states around the country. If for nothing else, I would rather see a committee, some of the discussion on the tax debate, and some of these type of things. I think the Alabamans are certainly interested about it, and I think that's a good stuff for some local state coverage and regional type thing, but we got 40 other 9 states out here, and we're really not interested in what's going internally in Alabama today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for telling us.
I promise to watch the Wyoming show just for that gentleman's sake.
We're already in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and we spent 3 days there, so we certainly have given Wyoming their fair share of coverage. Montgomery, Alabama, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Bob?
Yes.
I would like to ask you about the Alabama Attorney General's race. There have been some polls recently that show that Montgomery attorney and taxpayer advocate Jim Ziegler is the leader at the moment, with Montgomery DA Jimmy Evans number 2. Mm-hmm. I want to know what you think about that race, Ziegler's prospects, and whether Jimmy Evans will actually run or stay where he is.
Well, as recently as last night and this morning, Mr. Ziegler was quoted as saying that the cost of waging a campaign for Attorney General was such that he might turn his attention to another state office, namely the state auditor, which right now nobody seems to want. I'm not sure why, but that state job is wide open, and Ziegler, with his very substantial name identification, would immediately go into that race, I would suspect, as the favorite, because Alabama voters do have a tendency to vote for familiar names, particularly in the lesser state offices. So my guess would be that Jim Ziegler would probably forego the Attorney General's race and get back into the state political scene by running for state auditor, and then look at bigger things further down the road. Then that would leave, of course, the Montgomery DA, Jimmy Evans, the 2 senators from North Alabama, Gary Aldrich and Jim Smith, I believe it is, perhaps a couple of other DAs, Tom Sorrells or Sarles, I mispronounce it every time, from Dothan, but sort of a wide open race in which who knows who might pull it off.
Mobile, Alabama, go ahead, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Angus E. Cox from Mobile, Alabama. And I'm listening to the program. I have followed C-SPAN quite a bit, and I think it's the greatest thing to come along in a long time.
Mr. Cox, I say amen to that. It's outstanding.
I think the entire public should be available to all the public so they can see the mechanics of the politics that govern our lives. And I have been a Democrat all my life, born and raised in Alabama. In Geneva County I was born and migrated to Mobile County and been here since. And I'm proud of the state. I think it's got great potentials, but we've had some bad office-elected officials. I have, at one time been a Wallace man, but I'm no longer a Wallace. I'm a Fulmer man, and I'd like to see Emory Fulmer get in there and run for governor. I think the time is right, and it's opportune, and I think it's time for Alabama to wake up, and let's have a two-party system, and a good, clean two-party system, not a racist, but a two-party system. Don't put anybody in because he's white or black, but put him in there because he's qualified and can do the job. I enjoy your talk and your intelligence in presenting this, Mr. Ingram, and a lot of luck to both of you. A lot of luck to C-SPAN, and I hope it spreads out where everybody can familiarize themselves with the politics instead of sitting back and let them make a playhouse out of the things that we elected them to do up there.
Mobile, Alabama,
Thank
you very much for the call. We appreciate it. Bob Ingram, any comment?
Well, I think his reference to Mayor Farmer, who you had on your show last evening and who did not slam the door on the governor's race, certainly, I think, well, Mayor Farmer has told me, and I've published it and broadcast it, that if under the right circumstances he might indeed make another race for governor. The time seems to be much more appropriate 86 than in 82 when he ran 4 years too early, perhaps. He picked on George Wallace at the wrong time, but right now, I think the odds are against the mayor running again, but time could change that.
Bob, we were just in Richmond, Virginia a few days ago, and we talked to some of the city council people and the mayor of Richmond, and in Richmond it was very clear that there still are problems between the races. They're working out a great deal of fighting going back and forth between black and white politicians in the city of Richmond. Alabama is well known for the racial problems that they have had. Is race still a real problem in the state of Alabama?
I would like to say no. I would like to say that that's behind us, but I would say to the absolute contrary, with some reluctance. I would say that there may be race may be a bigger issue beneath, just below the surface in Alabama today. Let's say the wall is higher, the chasm is wider between the races today than perhaps at any time in the last 10 to 15 years. And it's unfortunate, but we would be naive and foolish to ignore this. And I think some of the politicians try to ignore it. We use a lot of code words, and we talk about quality of education. That's a race issue, whether the politicians will say so or not. We talk about law and order. That, to a large degree, is a race issue, whether they will say so or not. And I think maybe both races would be better served if we brought it out in the open and put the cards on the table and tried to work towards some solution to this thing. Yes, it is an issue in Alabama.
Are blacks running for statewide office down there?
We've had only one black to be elected to a statewide office, Justice Oscar Adams, the Alabama Supreme Court. He had been appointed to the bench. I say that because particularly in the judiciary, an incumbency is extremely important, and I'm not taking anything away from Justice Adams. He ran a fine race, and he was elected, and obviously he was elected by white voters because the white voters were in the majority. He was running against the same Mr. Ziegler we talked about a few minutes ago, and young Mr. Ziegler is a controversial figure, and perhaps there could have been a stronger candidate against Mr. Adams, but no one wanted to run against him. He's a good man, a good judge, but other than that, we've had no blacks elected to statewide office, and I don't see that happening anytime in the foreseeable future.
Jacksonville, Florida. Good morning. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Ingram. I'm from Jacksonville, Florida, in the military, and I'm a resident of Alabama, and I'd like to know if the corporate tax structure discourages new industry from coming to Alabama.
I would not say that the corporate tax structure discourages it. To the contrary, Alabama is very generous in giving tax breaks to new industry and industrial expansion and this sort of thing. I don't think the tax structure is the problem in attracting new industry. I think there are other problems much more significant than that, particularly just the general attitude that government has in recent years shown toward business. We are not viewed from without as a, quote, pro-business state. And that's a long and involved story involving the power of the unions and the AEA and some other political groups of this state. But I do not think it's the tax structure. In fact, I don't think industry is that interested in getting all these tax breaks if they can get the other things that they need, if they can get the good schools for the employees, if they can get the right people to work for them and just have a friendly atmosphere in which to work. I don't think the tax structure has been a hindrance.
Almost every state in the Union here recently was competing for the Saturn project to be built by General Motors. Tuscaloosa County there in Alabama was one of those areas which was really campaigning to get General Motors to build that plant in your state. They decided on Tennessee, and in a statement put out by Saturn President Bill Hoagland in saying one of the reasons why he didn't choose Tuscaloosa County, he said, quote, "We were thoroughly impressed with Tennessee's commitment to education." Is that saying something about the quality of education in Alabama that they chose Tennessee over Tuscaloosa County, Alabama?
Well, I think certainly it's saying something about Alabama's less than Tennessee's commitment to education, if I may put it rather awkwardly. A little history on Alabama and education. Historically, the state has provided most of the financial support for public schools in Alabama. Local effort, as we call it, where the cities, the counties might generate some revenue of their own, is just, it's sinfully low. The cities, the counties have just always looked to the state. And this has posed all manner of problem because the state has about run out of money to send to the counties, and it's so incumbent upon them to show some interest and some local support. And we have not made any A-pluses in that regard. And I think this, as much as anything else, might have contributed in the last analysis, the last decision of Saturn to go to Tennessee. It was understandably, geography played a role in it. They wanted to be closer to the major markets by being further north. But certainly, Alabama, the perception of Alabama education, its commitment to education, and the quality of education has hurt Alabama's industrial growth. No question about it.
How does teacher salary rate nationally? Are they average, below average? Can you give us a feel for that?
The teachers, of course, were terribly low, the salaries, until recent years, but in the past 2 years, the teachers have gotten consecutive, back-to-back 15% raises, which is, while they're certainly not to the national average, they're moving, they have made enormous strides toward the Southeast and the national average. The teacher's salary issue is about to go by the boards there. They're doing much better, as they should be doing better. They were woefully underpaid for so many years. But still, the support that our state gives for public education is woefully inadequate. There's no question about it.
Utica, Michigan. Good morning. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I would. It's been 30 days. I checked my phone bill. I want to thank all of the people in Alabama for giving me some of the most wonderful memories I have of good, wonderful people. I didn't go there knowing the people, even though I am a descendant of the first white child born there. There's a monument, if you know, in Kennemer's Cove, and I am her descendant. Now, my husband and I took a trip where we planned for a year in our motor home. When we went there, I found Mobile, Alabama to be the cleanest city that I have seen anywhere. But we had two experiences there that we will never forget. We got lost in the bird sanctuary there. And even though I never thought I'd see the day my husband would get lost, we did get lost in those woods. And a wonderful woman in one of the was working on the fishing boat, was coming back in her truck. We didn't know how far we had been from our motorhome.
Utica, can I ask you, do you have a specific question about Alabama politics by any chance?
Yes, I will come to that in a minute. But I would like to say that on the matter of racial issues, when you travel in a motorhome, you stay at private parks. We were there on Christmas Eve. The people at the park had prepared a beautiful dinner for people who had been there for a week or more, and they...
Utica, I'm sorry, do you have a specific question that you wanted to ask?
Yes. My question is on the racial issue there. I did not see, while we were there, any problems with race. There had been a Spanish family that came there, and they were well behaved, and it turned cold that Christmas Eve. And the next morning, they had the equipment that they couldn't cook in their motorhome like we could, and they were cooking outside, and the people took the Spanish family and let them use the facilities that they had for the party so that they could cook in warmth there.
So you didn't see any racial problems then, especially in Mobile, Alabama?
This was outside of Mobile, Alabama, and then we had been stuck on a hill.
Okay. Utica, Michigan, thank you very much for the call. We appreciate it. Is that an accurate description, you think, of Alabama, that there really aren't racial problems?
I don't, certainly. I fear that from our difficult days of 20, 25 years ago, that many people still have the perception that Montgomery and Selma and Birmingham is almost was and is a battleground. Nothing could be further from the truth. Day-to-day leadings of black and white are, as nearly always have been, pleasant, but the basic issues within the political framework, the root cause of most of the problems, or many of the problems, still has to do with the race issue. I wish it were not so, but it does.
Dothan, Alabama, good morning. Go ahead, please. Alabama, are you with us?
Yes.
Go ahead. Dothan, Alabama, go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. I'm a recent graduate of Alabama College.
Turn your TV set down and you'll get rid of that echo, ma'am.
Okay, hold on a minute.
For all of our viewers, when you call in and you finally get through, turn your TV set down and there won't be any nasty echo when you get on the air. Go ahead, caller.
I'm a recent graduate of an Alabama college, and I'm looking for some place to build my future. In light of Wallace cronyism, Goat Hill, etc., and the continuing turmoil in Alabama, like seeing the president of Florida State University, Dothan Fort Rucker, being arrested Sunday as a common criminal, why on earth should I stay in Alabama to build my future?
Okay. Dothan, Alabama, thanks for the call. Bob Ingram.
Well, first, it's Dothan, Alabama, please. It's
sorry.
biblical. Come, let us go to Dothan. That's all right. Well, we need people like this lady. If the problems, we have problems. I suppose every state does. But running away from a situation won't help solve it. We need strong, intelligent people to make some changes, and we do. It has been unreal how many people elected to public office in recent years or holding high office have been found or accused of misconduct in office, and it's shameful, but running away from it won't help it. Let's get them out and put some quality folks in.
Currently, the governor of Louisiana, a lot of speculation about what he's done in trial. Are politics in the South, you think, any dirtier than any other part of the country?
I could not say because I'm not familiar with how it might be in other states. We have had, unfortunately, a large number of indictments and convictions of public officials in Alabama in recent years. I think it's a combination of factors. One, public service in Alabama, I hope this is not true elsewhere, is not attracting the quality of people it once did. There are a whole lot of reasons, I think, for that, but I won't go into all of those. But we're not attracting the quality of people that we once did. It's not an honor. You don't serve now with pride. Something is missing, and because of this, we have had some problems. I just hope and pray it's not happening nationally, but in the other states. But we have had some here.
Birmingham, Alabama. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I wanted to make a comment on the black race issue. I don't know as far as the state is concerned, but as far as Birmingham, I think we've made a lot of progress in the race issue. We have a black mayor, we have black city council members, and a lot of the schools are mixed. And I think even though there is still race problems, I think that we have made a lot of progress. I just make that comment.
Birmingham,
I agree.
Birmingham, if I could ask you, you said you have a black mayor. I believe it's Mayor Arrington of Birmingham.
Right.
What is his political future? Do you think he's moving up within the state? You see him in a statewide or even in a congressional seat someday?
Yes, I think he's even popular in the city with the white people.
Okay. Birmingham, thanks for the call. Bob Ingram.
I don't disagree with anything the gentleman said. A great deal of progress has been made in so many areas, and commendable progress. Certainly, and so much comment has been made of the political advances made by the blacks, and it is deserving and overdue. I think, in fairness, please, it should be pointed out that from without, again, people may say, well, the white majority has opened its arms and we're electing all of these members of the black race to public office. In some instances, yes, but in most instances, let's be totally fair, the blacks have been elected as a result of redistricting of city city council districts, county commission districts, or legislative districts, as they should have been, because prior to that they'd been gerrymandered in such a way that they couldn't elect blacks. We now have districts which are predominantly or almost totally black, and understandably they elect black officials. That's why we have the 24 legislators. The mayor of Birmingham has diffused to such a point that it's almost a black city, 50-50 at least. So that is one of the explanations for the enormous advancement in the number of black public officials, and it's good for the state, it's good for the people. But that is the explanation for that.
Columbus, Georgia, good morning to you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning. I have a couple questions for you guests. My first question is, how come nothing is being done about the paramilitary camps that seem to be running rampant over the South? And my second question is in regards to the racial situation. You know, I think blacks have paid their dues as far as their loyalty to the United States, because blacks have served in every war that there ever has been. And I don't think the United States is going to find any more loyal race of people than blacks. And in that aspect, my question is, how come it's taking so long for a black to become president of the United States? I'll hang up and listen to his answer.
Columbus, thanks for the call. Bob Ingram.
I'm afraid I'm not quite qualified to answer why a black has not been elected to the President of the United States. Perhaps someday in the future it may well happen, but I could not answer that question. As to the paramilitary camps, or several that we have in Alabama, they are presently being under investigation. Apparently at this point they're not violating any law as such. They're apparently licensed to do this business. It's a disgrace. I think all Alabamians would like to run them completely out of the country, and I would hope that that would happen in the very near future. We don't need that anywhere in this country.
Huntsville, Alabama, go ahead, please.
Hey, this is Steve Meggs in Huntsville, Alabama. And it's been a source of continuing amusement to me here in North Alabama for the last 25 years to see the way that the national media has treated Alabama. Now, it's true there were a few problems down south, but this is, in most of Alabama, and especially in North Alabama, is becoming an economic paradise. We're the Silicon Valley of the South here. And there have been very few civil rights problems here in the North. And one of the things that I have noticed is that it's a real lesson in the power of public relations, especially when Alabama's public relations have been controlled by the New York national media for the purposes of selling their products on the evening news. Now, anyone who wants to visit Alabama, why don't you come to Huntsville and take a look around? I think you'll like it. And that's really all I have to say.
Huntsville, thanks for the call. We appreciate it. Is there a very distinct difference between southern Alabama and northern Alabama, Bob Ingram?
Very distinct. It goes back to our roots, our history. Alabama, in, say, 1800 or so, there were two distinct migrations into the state. From the North Carolina hill country mountains came all-white, independent small farmers in the North Alabama. I say all-white, they couldn't afford and did not have slaves. Across from Georgia in the what is we call the Black Belt, because of the texture of the soil, came the plantation owners with thousands of slaves. So from the beginning of the history of Alabama, you had the all-white North Alabama against the preponderance of so many blacks in South Alabama. A few Alabamians know this, and I doubt no one outside, but even in 1861, I'll give you a quick history lecture, when the convention met to vote on whether we should secede or not. It was a very close vote. The North Alabama counties thought it was ridiculous to fight a war over slavery because they had none. Actually, the delegates were 54 to 46 for secession. It was that close. And this conflict has continued up until this day. It's beginning to fade a little bit now. The state is becoming one big melting pot, so to speak. But for a century and a half, this conflict existed between North and South Alabama because of the distinct differences in the people and their roots.
In taking a look at a map, if we can, real quick, you saw a quick glance at it there, but I was just going to point out that Birmingham, Alabama is in the northern part.
Well,
Huntsville is
there, yes.
Huntsville is at the top. Huntsville, Alabama is up here, and Montgomery, Alabama would be more in the southern part of the state down there.
The central section of the state,
yes. You can see where it is. Next call, Montgomery, Alabama. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Good morning. I have a question for your guest.
Okay, go ahead.
I would like for you to answer a question that was asked last night of the mayor of Montgomery, Alabama. Why he was asked about the representation of blacks in the city, and I'd like to know that from you, Mr. Ingram, that a city that is 40% white, black, why is it that we have no blacks on the staff of the mayor's staff? Part A of this question, I would also like to know why City Hall has remained all white, with the exception of a few minor people. Number 2, I'd like to know what are the serious ramifications of the affairs between Hezekiah Wagstaff and the governor of Alabama. And I'll stand by for your answer. Thank you.
Well, answering the question about why the mayor's staff is all white or otherwise, I'm not competent or qualified to answer that, because I honestly don't know whether, if you say it is all white, then I'm confident that it is. But that question should be addressed to the mayor. He did mention, I watched the show last evening, that there are a number of blacks in rather high position in Montgomery. I think, interestingly, of the city council, Joe Reed mentioned that 4 of the 9 are black, which is a much higher percentage than the population might suggest is appropriate, but that's fine. It's working well. As to the question about Hezekiah Wagstaff, and we're changing directions completely, perhaps we should explain Mr. Wagstaff was the assistant press secretary to Governor Wallace, a black man. A controversy arose during the governor's trip to the Far East, and he was threatened with firing, and then was reinstated, and then has subsequently been fired again. It's an unfortunate situation, but apparently Mr. Wagstaff talked out of turn, and when you work for a governor, whether you like him or not, you better like him if you work for him. You play according to his rules or you don't play, and I think he violated the rules, and he is now seeking other employment.
Annapolis,
excuse me.
Annapolis, Maryland, go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Ingram, I am interested in what you would have to say about the National Democratic Party, what Democrats have to do to carry Alabama in 1988, and if you would comment as well, who would be an ideal Democratic nominee for the Democratic Party in 1988 to carry Alabama?
That's a toughie. Certainly the Democratic Party in recent years has adopted or embraced so many groups that are so objectionable, rightly or wrongly, to a majority of Alabamians. And I won't call the roll. I think we know many of them. It started in the '72 convention in Miami and has not improved a great deal since. I cannot conceive of, it would take a major change in the overall philosophy of the Democratic Party to regain this state. The point was made last night that, and it's a valid point, it's an accurate point, that the Republican Party today is much closer to what the Southern Democrats of 25, 30, 40 years ago was. It would take major surgery of the Democratic National Party to re-attract the grassroots, rank-and-file conservative Alabama Democrat. And I don't know who within the party might, on the level today, I don't know whether Senator Baker of Tennessee, who is a neighbor, and perhaps someone of that sort might be able to do it. Certainly a Kennedy couldn't do it, a Gary Hart couldn't do it. I don't see any right now who might be able to do it.
Does it need to be a Southern Democrat to really capture the South, or do you think that the Southern voters will go for a Northern candidate?
I think it needs to be more, I guess what we like to say, a more mainstream Democrat, and I'm not sure who that might be. I don't know. Again, what little expertise I have, if I have any, is more within the confines of the state of Alabama. I watch the national scene, of course, but I don't see the Democrats national, as far as the presidential election, recovering in Alabama for a long time. People talk about Reagan and what he's done. What they fail to remember is that since 1964, only one Democrat has carried this state in a presidential election. Of course, Goldwater carried it in '64, and Wallace in '68, and Nixon in '72. Then Carter, our next-door neighbor, barely carried it in '76, and then, of course, Reagan and Reagan. So Alabama has been in the Republican column in the presidential election 5 times out of 6 in the last 6 elections. So this is not a new phenomenon in this state. The Alabama Democrats got fed up with the National Democratic Party a long time ago.
When Alabama Democrats go to the poll, at least the Alabama primary, presidential primary, is part of what they call Super Tuesday, where a whole series of states all go to the polls at the exact same time. Does that bother voters in Alabama that their primary is the same as many other states and they don't get any special national attention like the Iowa caucuses or the New Hampshire primary? You're one of many states going to the polls on one given day.
No, in fact, we got Alabama in recent years has become, we were taken for granted for so long. We were a yellow dog Democrat state. We were going for the Roosevelt or whoever it might be, regardless, so neither party bothered to send anybody down here to campaign. Neither candidate would come. Man, we've become a sort of a battleground. We've had all the face cards and brought in a little money, and the national media comes in and leaves a few bucks with us, and it's good for the economy. And we were delighted. This was our very first presidential preferential primary, Super Tuesday, last year. And on the contrary, we were delighted to be a part of several states, and we'll do it again. The old line, it's easier to pick tourists than pick cotton, so come on down and spend your money with us.
Pick tourists, pick cotton. Mobile, Alabama, go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. Mr. Ingram?
Yes, sir.
I'm a construction worker from Mobile, Alabama.
Yes, sir.
I've been doing this job about 17 years. We've been on the road and go kind of like to Louisiana and Mississippi. And over there, before you hire on a job over there, you have to have a Mississippi driver's license, a Mississippi plate, and stuff like that. Whereas here in Alabama, we can get these transits in here, can take our jobs away from us from Texas, Mississippi, and around. What's being done in that area?
I'm not aware of anything that's being done. I've heard this complaint voiced earlier that some states have built walls around their states, and Alabama should respond, and it applies in several areas. In the state purchasing, people think that we should when the state buys material or equipment, that they should give preferential treatment to the in-state business over the out-of-state. They pay taxes and this sort of thing. I've always been a little nervous about wall building of that sort. I think in the long run everybody suffers. But beyond that, I could not comment on your question, sir.
New Orleans, Louisiana. Good morning. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Mr. Ingram, what I'd like to find out, in the state of Alabama, I feel that in some way, I'm not totally convinced that the governor of this state has totally changed his feelings about the way he feels about segregation and the way he felt about blacks in the 60s. He made a statement back in the 60s about segregation being now and forever. In your opinion, do you think that he's made this total change of heart and he's a born-again Christian? And can he effectively handle a state whereby blacks come under his jurisdiction, so to speak? Thank you.
Thanks for the call.
Well, you have to take a long, and I don't have the time, nor will I take the time, look at George Wallace. Few people remember that in his early days, George Wallace was, I'm not going to say liberal, but he was certainly not nearly as conservative on the race question as many other Alabama politicians were. In 1948, when the Dixiecrat revolt at the National Convention, Democrat, and the Alabamians walked out, George Wallace walked in. He was an alternate delegate, and he stayed at that convention. He solicited an appointment to the Tuskegee University, it is now Tuskegee Institute Board of Trustees. Later, he saw the direction the state was going, and he became the segregation today, tomorrow, forever candidate. That was the statement he made in his inauguration speech of '63. I'm not going to question the governor's motives. I think he does sincerely believe that he had to make some changes in his thinking. I think he is sincere. Certainly many blacks felt so. Without a substantial black vote in 1982, he would not have been elected governor for a fourth time. But the question of whether he is capable now, with this view of continuing to govern a state, which includes a large percentage of blacks, that will be for the people to decide, I suppose, next year.
I understand that Governor Wallace had some major spinal cord surgery in the summer. What is the current health situation of Governor Wallace?
Governor Wallace, of course, has suffered so beyond any of our comprehension since the tragic attempt on his life in Laurel, Maryland in 1972. People simply cannot imagine what this man has gone through. It's many would not could have made it. George Wallace is a remarkable man, and everybody admires him for that and applauds him for that. Every indication is that the very new surgery that was performed on him in Denver did provide some relief for him. Not totally. There were some problems on the recent Far East trip in which he was had some difficulty. But there does seem to be an improvement in his condition, and we all, Wallace fans and Wallace foes, pray that that has happened, because the man has suffered more than any man deserves to suffer.
Tell us something about the First Lady of Alabama, Governor Wallace's wife, Lisa Wallace. Nancy Reagan is involved in things like drug abuse here nationally. Is Lisa Wallace, the governor's wife, involved in politics at all there in Montgomery, in Alabama?
Not quite. In fact, she has been a very exceedingly low-key First Lady. It's been an unusual contrast. Of course, this is the governor's third wife, Governor Lurleen, the dear, dear lady who served as our governor for 18 months before death by cancer. Then several years later, he married for a second time the niece of a former governor, Cornelia Ellis, and that marriage ended in divorce. Cornelia was a very high-profile governor. I mean, she was out in the limelight constantly and enjoyed it, and a strikingly attractive young woman. And then, as I say, that marriage ended in divorce, and he then remarried a third time. Lisa is a very dear, sweet woman. She has a son by a former marriage, and I think at this present time she's spending more time of being a mother and a wife rather than being a First Lady, which I think is certainly, I don't think anyone would fault for that.
Montgomery, Alabama, good morning. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Bob.
Good morning.
I'd like to say that I'm very happy that C-SPAN has offered you as our candidate to represent Montgomery. We're all real proud of you, and we think you do a great job. I have a couple quick questions. Number one, do you believe that a viable Republican candidate could defeat Governor Wallace? Number two, do the Republicans have a viable Republican candidate for governor? And number three, what can be done to encourage the Republican Party to identify, develop, and support viable Republican candidates for the governor's race? It's a hurry day.
All right, number one, I am one of those perhaps a minority of Alabamians who am personally persuaded that Governor Wallace will not run next year. I think he has said that he will look at the polls, and if they suggest he is in trouble, can't win, he will not run. He does not want to leave office as a loser. He's very concerned about what history is going to say about him. He doesn't want the last paragraph to say that he ran one time too many. Number two, I firmly believe, because I think if you put the candidates on a ballot today in Alabama, the likely candidates, Baxley, Graddick, James, McMillan, and Wallace, and none of the above, I suspect none of the above would lead the ticket. I think there's a vacuum. I think the people are looking for someone else. And I do believe, as we've said earlier, that Emory Farmer conceivably could be a very strong candidate next November as a Republican if he bowed up his back and went after it. I'm not persuaded he will, but I think with the right encouragement he might. Financial encouragement is what I'm talking about. But I do think there would be a possibility that Mr. Farmer, I don't know of another Republican who would have a prayer. There's several who are talking about it. Mr. Hunt, Mr. Lyons. I'm sorry, I think they're just running for the fun of it if they run. Emory Farmer could conceivably be a very strong candidate against one of these Democratic nominees.
Montgomery, Alabama, go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Is that Mr. Ingram?
Yes, you're on the air with Mr. Ingram. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Ingram.
Good morning.
We enjoy you all the time, but I just want to say a word about the race relations. I moved down here from New York after I'd been living up there about 30 years, and we moved in 73, and I have never, in New York, the blacks, when they were waiting on you in the stores and when they were in the public, they were so rude. And I have not had one black person be rude to me. They're all friendly to me. And I want to publicly thank Alabama for that. It's a beautiful place to live.
Montgomery, Alabama, what do you think of your governor, Governor Wallace? Is he a good governor?
I didn't hear you.
Do you think Governor Wallace is a good governor?
Well, I think there's a lot of political up and downs in Alabama, but everybody knows it. They don't keep it a secret.
Okay. Montgomery, thanks for the call. We appreciate it. What are they keeping a secret, Bob Ingram? Anything you can tell us?
I don't know.
What
I don't dare
secret
tell
is.
you. I've got a few ideas, but I'll let that pass.
You spoke very briefly about a controversy around Governor Wallace's aides while he was in China. I guess he made a recent trip to Asia. Very quickly, with only about a minute and a half left, can you tell us what is some of this controversy? What happened when the governor was in China?
Well, it started rather innocently. The question, and we talked about this earlier, because of the governor's health problems, and he's out of the office so often, and now he was gone for 20 days on the tour, the obvious question was asked, well, who's running the store? Who's in charge? And Mr. Wagstaff, the assistant press secretary, identified 3 people, including himself. To be perfectly candid, Mr. Wagstaff is an assistant press secretary. There are any number of people who politically outrank him in the cabinet. And the fact that he included himself as one of the 3 acting governors and did not include a couple of others who felt that they should have been included, they were quite offended by this, and this kind of got out of hand, and one thing led to another. These 2 offended parties sought to have him take a leave of absence, and one thing led to another, and then Mr. Wagstaff, after the governor returned, it appeared that everything had been resolved, and then it came back up again, and I think Mr. Wagstaff probably said a little more than he should have from a hospital bed interview a couple of nights ago about the governor's role in it, and that was just a bit too much. He's had some problems in the past. He was found to be driving a state car for about 5 years without a driver's license, and probably anyone other than Mr. Wagstaff, or many other than him, might have been released for that little indiscretion.
Bob Ingram, unfortunately, we were all out of time, but that's okay. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been interesting.
I've had a ball. I hope your audience has.
Good. Bob Ingram, editorial director of WSFA TV, Montgomery,